History doesn't just record power, it buries it in layers of dust and blood. Deep in the Mexican jungle, a nameless queen lies drenched in toxic crimson, guarding a secret that lasted 1,000 years. But the shadows of the past have a way of finding new skin. From the stone pyramids of the Maya to the cobalt blue walls of Coyoacán, the story of the woman is a story of resistance, pain, and a beauty that refuses to die. One was wrapped in cinnabar, the other in plaster and iron. Both were broken by fate, yet both became immortal through the very scars the world tried to hide. Open your eyes. We are going beyond the mask. Because here, it only gets darker. Tonight, we begin with something a little darker. A descent into a forgotten age of plagues, divine punishments, and rotting pottage. We are stripping away the polished armor and chivalry that Hollywood sold you, and looking into the grim, muddy reality of the Middle Ages. The truth is simple, you wouldn't last a single day. So before you get comfortable in your modern safety, take a moment to subscribe and join our family of shadows, but only if you truly crave the darkness I share here. And tell me in the comments, from which corner of the world, and at what hour of the night are you watching? It's always fascinating to see who joins us in the deep hours. Now dim the lights. Perhaps turn on a fan for that low, unsettling hum. Let's drift into tonight's nightmare together. Congratulations, you've just clawed your way back to the year 1325. The good news, you are breathing. The bad news, so are the thousands of fleas sharing your bed. Your mattress is a half-rotted pile of straw, infested with vermin, and smelling of the barn floor it was 3 months ago. Forget memory foam or pillows. You have a wool blanket that hasn't seen water since last winter, now weighing as much as a small cow from the accumulated filth of generations. You snap awake as the church bell tolls in the distance, the medieval version of an alarm, only louder, colder, and far less merciful. Your home is a single-room wooden hut, a windowless box where your family, your livestock, and a symphony of insects share the same air. The smell is a biblical blend of stale ale, goat musk, and a stench you pray isn't mold, but deep down, you know it is. Scented candles don't exist here. Even if they did, they'd only melt into the dirt floor beneath your feet. You try to stretch, but your joints crack like an old wooden door. At 22, you are already middle-aged by the standards of this world. Getting out of bed is a gamble. You'll either step into the mud from last night's rain leaking through the thatch, or something far worse left by your neighbor's chicken. Welcome to a world where privacy is a forgotten myth. You wake up surrounded by parasites, rodents, and 10 other people. And this is just the beginning. Nature isn't calling politely anymore, it's screaming. This is where the lack of a modern bathroom becomes a ritual of humiliation. No seat, no flush, no porcelain. In the 14th century, relieving yourself is a public event. As a peasant, your toilet is a wooden bucket behind the shack, already overflowing from a family member's bad run-in with spoiled turnips. The stench is ancient. You do your business, hold your breath, and then comes the kicker. You hurl it into the street. Gardelow, a desperate cry of watch out below. But the streets are already rivers of human waste and mystery liquids. If you're lucky enough to use a public latrine, you'll sit shoulder to shoulder with strangers in a room where ventilation is a cruel joke. Toilet paper? Most use straw, moss, or a scrap of rough wool. Some use nothing at all, which explains why the handshake was a distant invention. Even in the castles, the garderobe is just a hole in the wall dropping waste into the moat. A perfect entry point for attackers to climb up through the filth. Whether farmer or baron, every morning is a disgusting gamble with your own dignity. You survived the morning ritual, so you expect a reward. A warm meal, perhaps? Think again. There is no comfort in a medieval kitchen. Breakfast is a grim affair of pottage, a thick, gray sludge made of grains, beans, and whatever was found on the forest floor. It has been simmering in the same pot for weeks, with new scraps simply dumped on top of the old. It's not a recipe, it's a slow-motion experiment in survival. On the side sits a hunk of bread so stone-hard it could deflect a mace, bulked up with sawdust and ground acorns because wheat is a rich man's fever dream. To drink? Don't touch the water, it's a graveyard of parasites. You drink weak ale at 6 a.m. Even the children do. It won't make you happy, but it's the only thing that won't kill you instantly. Meat and cheese are ghost stories told on saints' feast days. You chew your gritty bread, ignore the rat that nibbled it during the night, and prepare to work. Getting dressed offers no relief. You own exactly one outfit, a rough, scratchy wool tunic you've worn for years. Fashion doesn't exist. There is only the slow disintegration of your clothes. You are likely going commando under layers of sweaty, stiff linen that smells like a compost pile. There are no machines to wash them, and lie is too precious to waste. Your skin is a battlefield. Everyone, from the lowliest monk to the highest noble, is a walking insect farm. Fleas and lice live rent-free on your body, and the itching is constant, maddening, and inescapable. You'll be scratching yourself while speaking to the priest, and he won't even blink. There is no dermatologist, no cream for your rashes, only the slow, rhythmic itch of a life owned by parasites. Welcome to the Middle Ages. It only gets darker from here. You continue to suffer, wrapped in a layer of permanent discomfort. If you are fortunate enough to evade an infection, that relentless rash becomes your silent, medieval shadow for the next 6 months. Now, dressed in misery and itching under damp wool, it's time to face the world with a morning smile. But you won't, because in the Middle Ages, a smile is a dangerous reveal, not of your soul, but of your decay. Oral hygiene is as rare as a warm bath. There are no brushes, no pastes, no escapes from the rot. You might rinse your mouth with vinegar or chew on a twig, but your teeth are fighting a losing war. By your mid-20s, your mouth resembles a haunted crypt. Cavities are rampant, and your gums are perpetually swollen. If you are a noble, your wealth allows you to rot faster through expensive imported sugar. If you are poor, the gritty porridge and fermented bread do the job slowly but surely. Toothaches are like the medieval weather, a constant, thrumming background of pain that leaves you praying for the barber surgeon. He is the man who cuts your hair, but by candlelight, he is also the one pulling your molars with an iron hook and zero anesthesia. One infected root could be your death sentence, turning a simple ache into a fatal fever in a world without antibiotics. Kissing? A gamble with halitosis, so thick it's practically tangible. Your mouth is a battlefield, and the white flag has long been raised. Now, with your teeth throbbing, you head to work. There are no desks, no breaks, and no hope for a promotion. For 90% of the population, the job is simple. Do not die while laboring for someone else's luxury. You are a peasant, tilling land for a lord who doesn't know your name. You rise with the sun and collapse only when it vanishes. Your tools are a wooden hoe, a rusty sickle, and whatever bones in your body haven't snapped yet. There is no weekend. There is only the cycle of 6 days of labor and a Sunday spent praying your infected toe doesn't turn black. You plow fields by hand, dig ditches, and carry water until your spine curves into a permanent S. No one asks about your fatigue or your mind. If you are a woman, the field work is just the beginning. You return home to cook, spin, and tend to children who start their own labor at age 5. Tiny hands holding rakes, dreaming of a day they don't succumb to the flu. Your job isn't a career. It's a slow-motion endurance test where being unable to work simply means being replaced. As your back burns from the fields, you realize the weather is not a season, but a punishment. Winter brings wooden walls with gaps large enough for a chicken to fly through and windows covered in mere cloth. Firewood is a luxury, and gathering it from the wrong forest can be a capital offense. You huddle near dying embers in your damp tunic, waking up with a frozen nose and fingers like medieval popsicles. Then comes summer, not a relief, but a clay oven. Without fans or deodorant, You sweat through layers you dare not remove for fear of social judgment and insect swarms. The sun bakes you in the fields without shade or protection. Heat stroke is simply called taking a bad turn. And you keep working because the itch never stops, the food never improves, and the labor never ends. Exhausted and thirsty? You look at the bubbling stream nearby, but water in this age is a silent assassin. Upstream, a chamber pot was just emptied. Further up, a carcass is decomposing. Parasites and bacteria wait in every clear drop. This is why you drink ale, even the children do. It is small beer, weak but boiled, making it the only thing that won't kill you instantly. Bathing is even worse. It is considered medically reckless, a way to open your pores and invite disease into your body. You are told you are safer under a protective crust of filth. Even if you dared to wash, it is a grand production of hauling, boiling, and leaking tubs. Most settle for rainwater collected in barrels where birds and moss thrive. One wrong gulp, one rare bath, and you might spend your final days clutching your stomach on a straw bed. Next time you turn on a tap, remember the gamble your ancestors took with every sip. It only gets darker from here. You didn't have the luxury of safe hydration, so you drank the poison. Or perhaps you just stumbled over a stone shaped like despair. Either way, you are broken. You need help. You need a doctor. But pity the soul in the Middle Ages where medicine is merely polite torture with a theology degree. It begins with the diagnosis. Everything wrong with you, the cough, the rash, the creeping plague, is caused by your humors being out of balance. Blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Your health is an internal soup. Got a fever? Too much blood. The solution? Bloodletting. They drain your life into a bowl with a dull blade or a hungry leech. Barbers do the carving. Imagine a haircut and a hemoglobin extraction in one sitting. Feeling anxious? That's an excess of black bile. The cure? A violent herbal purge while they start carving your coffin. Surgery is done with knives unclean since the Crusades, heated not for safety but to look scarier. Antibiotics are centuries away. They think disease is just God's annoyance with your sins. If you recover, God takes the pity, the doctor takes the credit, and the leech gets promoted. In this age, medicine isn't about healing, it's about surviving the cure. After a day of labor and leeches, you shuffle back to your hovel, ready for the one joy left, a meal. But your meal is likely trying to kill you. Food preservation is a myth. Meat hangs for days, covered in flies and shared with rats. Bread, the cornerstone of your life, is often bulked with bark or clay. In rye season, you risk ergot, a fungus causing convulsions and hallucinations. It's like bread laced with LSD and tetanus. Vegetables mean turnips, boiled, mashed, or floating in that mystery swamp of pottage. Fruit rots instantly, and sugar is a rich man's vanity. Dairy is a bacterial gamble you take because the alternative is chewing boot leather. Most meals taste like wet burlap sprinkled with sadness. But food is also political. Poach a rabbit on the Lord's land, and your dinner could get you hanged. Every bite is a risk. In the Middle Ages, food doesn't nourish, it tests your will to exist. It is evening now. You've suffered and digested your suspicious stew. Do not relax, God is watching. So is the priest, and so is your neighbor who will rat you out if you miss Mass. Religion isn't part of life, it is life. The church is your spiritual landlord, and you are always behind on rent. Every hour is structured by bells. Missing prayer is a sin. Eating meat on Friday? Sin. A stray thought about a neighbor? Double sin. Hell is vividly real, described by priests as lakes of boiling blood and eternal wailing. You can't read the Bible. It's in Latin, reserved for those too good for dirt. You rely on the church to interpret your misery. If your crops fail, you didn't kneel hard enough. Tithes are mandatory, a tenth of your wheat, your eggs, your life. Holidays are not for fun, but for fasting and confessing that joy is a dangerous indulgence. Questioning is fatal. heretics burn, skeptics are reformed. You chant and pray that after this dirt-covered life, you might find paradise. God may be merciful, but the church is not. If you thought being a peasant was rough, try doing it as a woman. All the famine and fear, plus the burden of childbirth and social invisibility. Being a woman is hard mode, with no restart button. Your path is locked, marry young, serve, and die tired. Intellectual growth stops when you learn to churn butter. Betrothed at 12, pregnant by 14. It's about land and livestock, not love. Once married, you are property. Your job is to produce heirs and not complain, lest you be branded a witch. Childbirth is a death lottery with no sterile tools or mercy. Many don't survive the second attempt. Once the baby is out, your work doubles, nursing in a lice-ridden hut while still helping in the fields. You are the break for everyone else. Unmarried women are suspicious. Outspoken ones are dangerous. Even in the church, you are ranked below men. You are expected to endure, obey, and suffer in silence, ideally while smiling. Because even in an age of universal agony, women were expected to suffer gracefully. So far, you've battled filth, famine, and the crushing weight of social injustice. But just as you think the day has reached its nadir, violence arrives, loud, bloody, and perfectly acceptable by medieval standards. Let's be clear, the Middle Ages were not a place of peace. Law and order were merely desperate hopes that the local lord wasn't in a foul mood. Violence is the air you breathe, in the home, on the streets, even in the silence of the church. Crime is a constant, and punishment is a brutal performance. Steal a loaf, and you lose a hand, lie, and your tongue is pierced. Gossip, and you wear the scold's bridle, a metal mask designed to correct your speech with a bar in your mouth. If you are accused of something grave, innocence is proven through torture. Welcome to trial by ordeal. You might reach into boiling water for a stone. If your burns don't fester in 3 days, you are innocent. Or perhaps you are thrown into a river. If you sink, you are innocent and likely drowned. If you float, you are guilty and executed anyway. It's a game show where the host is death itself. Executions are the era's cable TV, with cheering crowds bringing snacks to watch hangings and burnings. Domestic abuse is a duty, street fights are a pastime, and war is a permanent simmer. Violence isn't the breakdown of this society, it is the fabric of it. Walk carefully, keep your eyes low, and never trust a man with a club. You've survived the lice, the leeches, and the looming threat of disembowelment, but now you reach the final chapter, an early, unglamorous death. If you breathe past the age of 40, you are a statistical miracle, a venerable celebrity in a world of ghosts. While life expectancy hovers around 35, the reality is far grimmer. Half of all children are claimed by death before age 5. No vaccines, no hope, just one bad winter. If you survive childhood, you enter adulthood already broken. By 25, your joints creak like a monastery door, and you've traded your teeth and optimism for survival. For women, childbirth is a deadly gauntlet, a lottery of blood on a straw cot with only prayer for anesthesia. For men, death waits in a farming accident, an infected scratch, or a neighbor's drunken rage. Death also arrives in the silence of the plague, turning villages into cemeteries overnight, or in the madness of famine. You are lucky to even receive a funeral. Bodies are often hurried into shallow mounds to keep the rot away, buried without coffins if there is even space left in the churchyard. Your life was a struggle, your work was a burden, and your end was likely painful. But in the grand, dark history of humanity, your story is the foundation. As you fade into the earth, the bells of the church toll one last time, not for your soul, but for the next generation about to wake up in the mud. This was the Middle Ages, and it was never meant to be survived. In the end, life was a relentless siege, a brutal and brief skirmish where death was the only victor. You didn't retire from this world, you simply ceased to exist. Your final chapter was not a sunset, but a sudden extinguishing. So, how was your day? You woke in filth, emptied a bucket of waste, brushed your teeth with a prayer, and worked until your skeleton begged for mercy. You dodged executions and plague while itching through damp wool. This was one day in medieval Europe. Still dreaming of the knight in shining armor? That fairy tale is a myth polished by time. The reality was gritty, cruel, and profoundly unfair. Hierarchy was a cage. If you were born in the mud, you died in it. Even the nobles lived in drafty stone refrigerators, one bad soup away from a hasty burial. The simpler times were never simple. They were a relentless endurance test. Everything from chewing to childbirth came with a price. Life was survival, not leisure. You lived, suffered, and died within 10 miles of your birth. Yet, the wildest part is that people still found space for laughter and love. Humans are stubborn like that. So tonight, as you slip into a clean bed with indoor plumbing and heat, say a quiet thank you to the ancestors who fought rats and feudalism so you wouldn't have to. Long before she was Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia and icon of ambition, she was simply Sophie. Born in 1729 to an obscure German princely family, her tiny duchy in Pomerania offered no path to power. But Sophie possessed a weapon no title could grant, a razor-sharp intelligence and a burning hunger for greatness. Her upbringing was a cold forge. Her mother was a calculating social climber, and her father a distant Prussian officer. Early on, Sophie learned to navigate the thin line between obedience and cunning. She read voraciously, mastering the art of observing a room before uttering a word, skills that would become survival tools in Europe's most brutal court. When Empress Elizabeth of Russia sought a bride for her heir, Grand Duke Peter, she wanted someone pliable and easy to control. Sophie, at just 14, fit the profile perfectly. Noble, foreign, and seemingly humble. In 1744, Sophie arrived in the freezing capital of St. Petersburg, wearing thin German fabrics and a diplomatic smile. Her mother pushed her forward like a pawn on a chessboard, but Sophie was already playing her own game. To survive, she discarded her past and converted to orthodoxy, taking the name Ekaterina Alexeyevna, Catherine. The ceremony was a public burning of bridges. She was stepping into a foreign empire with no way back, transforming herself into something the world would never forget. No one watching that quiet teenage girl in her fur-trimmed coat could have predicted the storm she was about to unleash. It only gets darker from here. In the end, life was a relentless siege, a brutal and brief skirmish where death was the only victor. You didn't retire from this world, you simply ceased to exist. Your final chapter was not a sunset, but a sudden extinguishing. So, how was your day? You woke in filth, emptied a bucket of waste, brushed your teeth with a prayer, and worked until your skeleton begged for mercy. You dodged executions and plague while itching through damp wool. This was one day in medieval Europe. Still dreaming of the knight in shining armor? That fairy tale is a myth polished by time. The reality was gritty, cruel, and profoundly unfair. Hierarchy was a cage. If you were born in the mud, you died in it. Even the nobles lived in drafty stone refrigerators, one bad soup away from a hasty burial. The simpler times were never simple. They were a relentless endurance test. Everything from chewing to childbirth came with a price. Life was survival, not leisure. You lived, suffered, and died within 10 miles of your birth. Yet, the wildest part is that people still found space for laughter and love. Humans are stubborn like that. So tonight, as you slip into a clean bed with indoor plumbing and heat, say a quiet thank you to the ancestors who fought rats and feudalism so you wouldn't have to. Long before she was Catherine the Great, Empress of Russia and icon of ambition, she was simply Sophie. Born in 1729 to an obscure German princely family, her tiny duchy in Pomerania offered no path to power. But Sophie possessed a weapon no title could grant, a razor-sharp intelligence, and a burning hunger for greatness. Her upbringing was a cold forge. Her mother was a calculating social climber, and her father a distant Prussian officer. Early on, Sophie learned to navigate the thin line between obedience and cunning. She read voraciously, mastering the art of observing a room before uttering a word, skills that would become survival tools in Europe's most brutal court. When Empress Elizabeth of Russia sought a bride for her heir, Grand Duke Peter, she wanted someone pliable and easy to control. Sophie, at just 14, fit the profile perfectly. Noble, foreign, and seemingly humble. In 1744, Sophie arrived in the freezing capital of St. Petersburg, wearing thin German fabrics and a diplomatic smile. Her mother pushed her forward like a pawn on a chessboard, but Sophie was already playing her own game. To survive, she discarded her past and converted to orthodoxy, taking the name Ekaterina Alexievna, Catherine. The ceremony was a public burning of bridges. She was stepping into a foreign empire with no way back, transforming herself into something the world would never forget. No one watching that quiet teenage girl in her fur-trimmed coat could have predicted the storm she was about to unleash. The stage was set for betrayal, revolution, and the birth of an empire. From the moment Sophie stepped into the Russian court, she ceased being a pawn and began her transformation into a queen. Her marriage to Grand Duke Peter was supposed to be a gateway to royalty, but it quickly became a cage. Peter was no fairy tale prince. Immature and obsessed with toy soldiers, he preferred war games in his room to governing a nation or showing his wife affection. While Peter resented Russia and idolized Prussia, Catherine embraced her new home with fierce resolve, mastering the language, history, and Orthodox rituals. She chose to belong, while Peter chose to escape. This was a political death match in a viper's nest of paranoia. Empress Elizabeth ruled with an iron fist, but as her health failed, Catherine was watched constantly, her letters read, her every move scrutinized. She could trust no one. Yet, she played the game with silent grace, cultivating allies among military officers and scholars, contrasting her restraint with Peter's childish contempt for tradition. Behind closed doors, she studied Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire, building a vision for a Russia defined by reason. But as long as Peter lived, she remained in a powerless limbo. She knew the throne would not be inherited, it would have to be seized. In 1762, the moment arrived. Empress Elizabeth died, and Peter III took the throne, only to unravel it immediately. He alienated the church, nobility, and army while groveling to Prussia, Russia's enemy. Catherine saw her opening. In July, while Peter was away, she launched a bloodless coup. Supported by the Imperial Guard and her lover, Grigory Orlov, she rode through St. Petersburg in full regalia and was proclaimed Empress Catherine II. Peter, abandoned and caught off guard, surrendered within days and soon died under mysterious circumstances. Officially a colic, unofficially murder. Catherine was now empress, not by birth or marriage, but by sheer audacity. A foreign-born woman with no legitimate claim had taken the throne without a single battle. But her real challenge was just beginning, transforming a bold grab for power into a lasting legacy. She needed to rule not as a schemer, but as a visionary, redefining what it meant to be a woman in power. Once she wore the crown, Catherine did not rest. She wanted to transform Russia intellectually, idolizing the bold thinkers of the Enlightenment. She believed in progress and reason, corresponding with Voltaire for 15 years, and even purchasing Diderot's entire library to support him. She didn't just read philosophy, she applied it, forming the Legislative Commission in 1767 to rewrite Russian law. Her nakaz was a radical manifesto, speaking of equality and the end of torture. Yet, her ideals had to survive the reality of a feudal, conservative land. She walked a tightrope, expanding secular education, while reaffirming the nobility's control over serfs to ensure their loyalty. She was a philosopher queen in public and a practical empress in private, ruling with an iron hand in a velvet glove. She wasn't making Russia European. She was making it modern on her own terms. Catherine's ambition didn't stop at the borders. Where Peter the Great opened a window to the west, Catherine knocked down the walls. She waged wars to reshape the map, most notably against the Ottoman Empire. These campaigns weren't just for land, but for influence, positioning her as the protector of Orthodox Christians. Under generals like Suvorov and Potemkin, Russia seized Crimea and secured warm water ports, proving it was no longer a backward cousin but a global force. To the west, she maneuvered the partitions of Poland, erasing the nation from the map to claim millions of new subjects. But Catherine also conquered with ideas, building new cities, expanding trade, and inviting German settlers to cultivate the land. She was redrawing the world in her image. From the muddy hovels of the poor to the gilded halls of St. Petersburg, she understood that power was a ghost. It only existed if you believed in it and were willing to bleed for it. She held the empire together with a mixture of terror and enlightenment, ensuring that while she might have been a stranger when she arrived, she would die as its mother. History remembers her as the Great, not because she was kind, but because she was inevitable. As the candles flicker low in her study, the shadows of the past whisper her name, and the map of the world remains forever changed by her hand. It only gets darker from here. Gondardijan bu metin yaklaşık 7.550 karakterden oluşuyor. Noctivara Stories in Okasvetli, Agir ve ders Verisi Taninu Kulinarik. Impertorian Bayu Massini, Catherine'in Skandalarla Dalu Özel Hayatini. Pugachev Isianinin Getirtijai Diseti ve Onin Baraktijai, Selaskili Marasi and Leighton Ozgan Lesterilmus Metna Sagitator. Karakter Uzunlagu Original Metninal Bayerbier Dengelemister. The empire became a mosaic stretching from the frozen Baltic to the sun-scorched shores of the Black Sea. Catherine remained the cold, central force, reading every report, issuing every command, and personally molding the flesh of her expanding domain. Her critics whispered of a power-hungry tyrant, but to her, expansion was not mere ambition, it was a cosmic destiny. A ruler, she believed, was measured by the shadows their borders cast. She did not just want to occupy Russia, she wanted to rebuild it as a civilized titan, feared by enemies and respected by peers. Yet, for all her iron control, Catherine was equally infamous for what transpired behind the heavy palace doors. Her private life became a feast for gossip, a carefully curated parade of young, handsome, and often politically useful lovers. She did not hide them in the shadows. Instead, she rewarded them with titles and estates, dismissing them with a polite promotion when their time had passed. Among them stood Grigory Potemkin, a man whose brilliance matched her own. Their bond blurred the lines of romance and statecraft, a partnership so deep some believe they wed in secret. Together, they conquered the South, but Europe could not look past the scandal. Malicious pamphlets painted her as a lustful monster, culminating in the grotesque and false legends spread after her death to rot her legacy. Why the obsession? Because Catherine was a woman who wielded power without apology. She refused to be a saintly virgin or a tragic pawn. She lived and ruled on her own terms, and in a world of men that made her the most dangerous creature of all. She separated emotion from the throne, a feat few kings ever achieved. Her liaisons were not weaknesses. They were tactical maneuvers in a grand game of passion and power. But even a goddess of the Enlightenment faces ghosts. In 1773, that ghost took the form of Yemelian Pugachev, a bearded Cossack who claimed the impossible. He was the dead Peter III, returned from the grave to reclaim his stolen crown. To the desperate and oppressed, the truth of his identity mattered less than the hope of his fire. He promised liberation, an end to serfdom, and the blood of the nobles. His words ignited the Volga region, turning peasants into a tidal wave of vengeance. It was the largest uprising in Russian history. Fortresses fell, and the soil drank the blood of the aristocracy. For a moment, the empire teetered on the edge of the abyss. Catherine did not panic. She acted with surgical cruelty. In 1774, the rebellion was crushed. Pugachev was displayed in an iron cage like a captured beast before being beheaded in Moscow. This was a turning point. The empress who once quoted Voltaire now prioritized the cold stability of the cage over the light of philosophy. Her dreams of freeing the serfs died in the silence of that execution. She leaned harder on the nobility, trading their loyalty for absolute dominion over the peasants. The storm had passed, but it left Catherine haunted by the knowledge that a throne built on inequality is always one spark away from the funeral pyre. As the final winter of her life approached, Catherine had ruled for over 3 decades, longer than any woman before her. She had defied every expectation and redrawn the map of the world. Russia was now a powerhouse, its territory swollen by 200,000 square miles, its reach touching warm waters for the first time. Yet her mark was not just on the earth, but in the mind. She founded the Hermitage, gathered the world's art, and corresponded with the greatest thinkers of the age. In a land seen as backward, she demanded sophistication. She was a woman of science, publicly taking the smallpox vaccine to lead her people out of the darkness of superstition. But her reign was a tapestry of contradictions. She admired freedom, but tightened the chains of serfdom. Her reforms polished the surface of the empire without ever healing its fractured foundations. She ruled not by divine right, but by an unyielding force of will and relentless calculation. They called her a usurper, a reformer, a seductress, but above all, she was effective. When she drew her last breath in 1796, Russia was wealthier and more formidable than it had been in centuries. She left behind a legend that would endure as a myth. Behind the golden frames and state decrees, Catherine remained a woman navigating a world built for men, reshaping it in her own image. She was a stranger who became a mother to a land that initially did not want her. She never stopped learning, never stopped working, and never stopped defending the power she had bled to obtain. Yet, she was profoundly lonely. Surrounded by courtiers and lovers, she wrote of the few she could truly trust. Her son, Paul, became a man she feared would dismantle her life's work, and the death of Palenque in 1791 left a void that no amount of territory could fill. Catherine the Great did not just wear a crown, she became the crown. And as the candles flicker low in her study, the shadows of history whisper her name, a name that remains an inevitable force long after the empire she built has turned to dust. It only gets darker from here. The provided text consists of approximately 7,200 characters. Following the Noctivara Stories' dark, atmospheric, and scholarly tone, I have prepared the English version of the text, matching the original character count and covering the legacy of Catherine the Great and the mystery of the Red Queen. Catherine crafted her image with the precision of a surgeon. She understood the haunting power of a narrative and wielded it better than any monarch of her age. She posed as the mother of Russia, an enlightened philosopher, a fierce warrior, and a divine patron of the arts. But beneath these imperial masks was a woman who had survived the cold blade of rejection, the poison of betrayal, and the fires of rebellion. When she breathed her last in 1796, she left behind an empire transformed, but also a shroud of questions. Could she have broken the chains of serfdom? Were her Enlightenment ideals merely a gilded cage for her political ambition? History remembers her by the title she never granted herself, the Great. It wasn't because she was just or kind. It was because she seized power and held it on her own terms in a time when women were meant to be silent. She didn't just wear the crown. She redefined the very blood required to deserve one. From the frozen palaces of the north, we now descend into the humid, suffocating depths of the Chiapas jungle in southern Mexico. Here, The ruins of Palenque whisper the dark secrets of the ancient Maya. Limestone temples rise like jagged teeth above the green canopy, eroded by time but still pulsing with history. In 1994, a hidden chamber revealed a mystery that had remained silent for centuries. Archaeologists, led by Fanny Lopez Jimenez, discovered a sealed vault beneath Temple 13, a modest pyramid shadowed by the great King Pakal's tomb. No looters had breached its silence. It was pristine, heavy with the scent of the earth. As they forced open the stone sarcophagus, a cloud of red dust rose like a ghost, brilliant, toxic, and shocking. The interior was saturated with powdered cinnabar, a mercury sulfide used by the Maya to mark the sacred and the dangerous. Lying within this crimson fog was the skeleton of a woman, her fragile bones adorned with jade and shell. Everything about this burial screamed royalty, yet there was no name, no glyphs, no identity. She was an enigma draped in red. The researchers called her the Red Queen. She was not meant to be remembered with words, but through the primal language of ritual and the violent color of the sun. The most haunting element of the tomb was that blood-red dust. Cinnabar was more than a pigment. It was a symbol of the life force of sacrifice and the transition between life and death. Red was the color of the sunrise and the blood required for the gods. To bathe a corpse in cinnabar was a ritual of deification, preparing the spirit to cross into Xibalba, the Maya underworld. But cinnabar is a slow poison, causing tremors and madness. The Maya may not have known the chemistry, but they felt its potency. To cover a queen in it was to declare her a being of divine power, a mortal no longer. In Palenque, only 2 figures were found drenched in this red shadow, the great King Pakal and this nameless woman. This detail suggests a bond of equal status, a marriage of power that transcended the grave. Surrounding her remains was a world of cold jade and obsidian. These were not mere trinkets, they were tools for the soul. The Maya saw jade as a symbol of eternal life, the green heart of the jungle. For the Red Queen, it covered her chest and face in a mosaic funerary mask, designed to protect her identity from the gods of the underworld. Scattered near her were bone needles and obsidian blades, perhaps the tools of a priestess or a royal matriarch who shed her own blood in ritual. Every item was an intentional map for her journey through the dangerous layers of the afterlife. There was no gold here, only the spiritual weight of items chosen to sustain her spirit. Yet, the void of her name remains. Is she Tiziak Buajaw, the loyal wife of King Pakal? She was noble-born and bore the kings who would rule Palenque's golden age. The proximity of her tomb to Pakal suggests a deliberate pairing, rulers together in the darkness of the earth. DNA tests were inconclusive. She shared no maternal blood with the king, but in the Game of Thrones, blood is rarely as important as a strategic marriage. Others whisper she might be Sak Kuk, the powerful mother who ruled before Pakal came of age. The Red Queen left her name in the dust, choosing to be remembered only by the color of her sacrifice. Catherine was the great in the light of history, but this woman remains the red in the shadows of the jungle. True power does not always need a name. Sometimes, it only needs a mystery that lasts 1,000 years. It only gets darker from here. This final section of the script encompasses approximately 6,900 characters. In alignment with the Noctivara Stories style, it explores the political power of Maya women, the cosmological architecture of Palenque, and the spiritual bond between the Red Queen and King Pakal. Others suggest she may have been a high priestess, a sister, or a royal ancestor whose name was surrendered to the erosion of history. Yet, the evidence points most strongly to Tiziak Buajaw, a queen by title, a mother of kings, and a spiritual counterpart to Pakal. The absence of her name may not be an oversight. It may have been a final, intentional act of devotion. In Maya cosmology, the soul did not live on through stone monuments, but through ritual, through symbols and through the whispers of the earth. And so, the Red Queen remains suspended in the liminal space between legend and truth. A woman who ruled, remembered not in cold stone, but in scarlet and silence. To understand the Red Queen, one must understand the shadows she cast in her world. A world where Maya women, especially the royal ones, held a degree of influence that history has often ignored. In Maya civilization, politics was a blood affair. Royal women were far from passive consorts. They were diplomats, high priestesses, and the architects of dynasties. Their bloodlines were political capital used to forge alliances and secure divine claims to the throne. Take Sak-Kuk, the mother of Pakal the Great. When the throne of Palenque was vacant, she did not wait. She seized power and ruled as queen regent until her son came of age. She was no placeholder. She was a ruler in her own right, issuing decrees that shaped the very stones of the city. Without her, Pakal's ascent might have been a mere footnote in history, and she was no anomaly. Across the Maya landscape, in Yaxchilan, Naranjo, and Calakmul, the glyphs tell stories of women performing high ceremonies, navigating the bloody waters of warfare, and ruling outright. They were portrayed in Stelaean murals, draped in elaborate headdresses and jade regalia, standing beside kings as equals, or sometimes towering over them. Their words were carved into the skin of the earth until the memory faded. By the time the Spanish conquerors arrived, that memory had been buried. The colonial lens saw native women as silent specters in a male world, but archaeology reveals a complex hierarchy where power was negotiated through blood and spirit. This context illuminates the Red Queen. She may not have ruled in name, but her burial, rich, sacred, and positioned at the heart of the city, suggests she was a central pillar of the royal order. Her jade mask was a symbol of an identity held in life and guarded in death. The Red Queen was not merely buried with treasures. She was encased in architecture designed with a cosmic purpose. Her tomb was a gateway to eternity. Temple 13, where she was discovered, rises modestly next to the grand temple of the inscriptions, but its proximity is a silent testament to her importance. These structures were guided by the stars and the myths of their ancestors. The descent into her tomb is symbolic, a ritual journey downward into the throat of the underworld. The chamber is stark, cut from stone and sealed for over 1,300 years. There are no murals to tell her story, but perhaps that silence is the point. This was a space not for the living to interpret, but for the dead to transform. At the center, her limestone sarcophagus sits like an altar, echoing Pakal's tomb next door. While Pakal's lid is famously engraved with scenes of cosmic rebirth, the Red Queen's tomb focuses inward, on the body, on the Cinnabar, on the raw ritual of death. The tomb is aligned east to west, mirroring the sun's journey from the world of light to the world of shadows. Maya temples were cosmological tools, bridges between the heavens and the earth. To be buried here was to be elevated beyond the human realm. Her eternal home was a carefully constructed shrine where death became a transition of power. To the ancient Maya, death was a threshold into Xibalba, the place of fright. For the Red Queen, this crossing was political and deeply ritualized. Xibalba was no peaceful afterlife. It was a labyrinth of darkness, trials, and death gods. Only those properly prepared could survive the journey. The presence of bone needles and obsidian blades in her tomb hints at auto-sacrifice, rituals she performed in life or that were reenacted at her funeral to empower her ghost. Her funerary mask, assembled from jade tiles, was a spiritual vessel designed to preserve her face so she would be recognized by the gods. The ceramic vessels surrounding her once held the sustenance of the afterlife: chocolate, maize, and sacred water. Burial was a planting, and the afterlife was the harvest. Kings and queens were earthly incarnations of gods, and in death they returned to their divine origins. The Red Queen, drenched in the color of blood and entombed in a pyramid, was being prepared for rebirth as a cosmic being. Her story didn't end with the closing of the tomb, it began there. Just steps away lies Palenque the Great. His tomb is celebrated for its scale, but the Red Queen's tomb is extraordinary for its placement. In a city where every stone was positioned to reflect the cosmos, this closeness was a statement. If Palenque represented the sun, journeying through the night to rise again, then the Red Queen may have represented the moon, the feminine force that follows its own mysterious path across the sky. Together, they were the celestial balance of Palenque, Catherine and the Red Queen, two women from different worlds, both rewriting the rules of power, both leaving legacies that refuse to stay buried. One is remembered in the bright light of history, the other is a scarlet whisper in the jungle. It only gets darker from here. Together, they embodied a cosmic duality, the masculine and the feminine, king and queen, sun and moon, order and ritual. In Maya mythology, rulership was never a singular throne, it was a relational balance. Harmony in the cosmos required a mirror, and that balance extended deep into the dynastic court. By placing the Red Queen beside Palenque, the Maya were preserving more than a marriage. They were enshrining a cosmic partnership for eternity. Their proximity in the cold stone of death mirrored their roles in the heat of life. A queen not walking behind, but standing beside her king, sharing not just a palace, but a sacred legacy. In their tombs, they speak without words, two souls wrapped in cinnabar and shadow, joined across the abyss. It remains one of history's most profound and sacred silences. Though her name was surrendered to time, the Red Queen of Palenque endures not as a forgotten relic, but as one of the most enigmatic and powerful women of the ancient world. Her tomb, sealed for over 1,300 years, now whispers across centuries, inviting questions that grow louder with every grain of red dust uncovered. She represents a mystery that still resists the light of full understanding. We may never know her true name. No glyph carved it into the stone, no stela told her story. Yet the care in her burial, the richness of her jade, and the symbolism of her crimson-drenched bones speak of a woman of profound influence and royal blood. Today, the Red Queen forces us to reevaluate everything we thought we knew. She is a reminder that in the ancient Maya world, women were not silent shadows. They led the rituals, they governed the stone cities, and they shaped the destiny of dynasties. While kings like Palenque have long held the spotlight of history, her reemergence reminds us that power did not belong to men alone. It flowed through the veins of mothers, queens, and visionaries. Her legacy is more than the treasure she left behind. It is the conversation she has ignited among the living. Every jade bead, every layer of toxic cinnabar, and every architectural choice in Temple 13 tells us something deliberate. This woman mattered. And perhaps that is the most extraordinary part of her story. Not what we know, but the vastness of what we still do not. The Red Queen teaches us that history is not a collection of dead facts, but a living puzzle. She lies wrapped in red, the color of life, sacrifice, and rebirth. Her face, once hidden behind a jade mask, now stares back at us through the lens of wonder. She remains nameless, but not voiceless. Her tomb was sealed in stone, her story written in silence, and yet somehow she still speaks. But the dance of pain and power did not end with the Maya. Centuries later, in 1907, another woman of fire and shadow was born in the vibrant district of Coyoacán. Frida Kahlo's childhood home, the Casa Azul, the Blue House, was a sanctuary filled with color and quiet strength. It would later become a battleground and a museum for one of the most iconic spirits of the 20th century. Born to a German-Hungarian photographer and a devout Mexican mother, Frida was a creature of contradictions. She inherited her father's introspection and her mother's fierce resilience. As a child, she was imaginative and bold, asking questions that adults feared. But at age 6, polio struck, leaving her right leg thinner and weaker. a physical flaw she masked with long skirts but never allowed to limit her soul. Isolated by illness, she grew close to her father, who taught her to stay mentally sharp. Unlike the girls of her time, Frida did not dream of being a housewife. She aspired to be a doctor, enrolling in the prestigious National Preparatory School at 15. She was a rebel, a radical thinker, and a unique stylist among a sea of tradition. But before the fame and before the crash that would redefine her body, Frida Kahlo was already painting herself into the world with sharp edges. On September 17, 1925, Frida's life was split in two: the girl she had been and the woman she was forced to become. That afternoon, the wooden bus she boarded collided with a streetcar. In an instant, her future unraveled into twisted metal and agonizing silence. The crash was horrific. The streetcar crushed the bus against a wall, and Frida was impaled by an iron handrail. It entered her hip and exited through her pelvis. Her spine fractured in 3 places, her leg shattered, and her ribs broke. She was just 18. In the chaos, someone noticed her body was sparkling, not from blood, but from gold powder she had been carrying, which had exploded on impact, dusting her broken form like glittering ash. Taken to the hospital, she underwent dozens of surgeries, spending weeks in a body cast, flat on her back. The dream of being a doctor slipped away, but in that stillness, something else began to stir. Her father gave her brushes. Her mother rigged a mirror above her bed. And there, lying in plaster in agony, Frida began to paint. What started as therapy soon became a brutal and honest language. Frida did not paint pretty flowers. She painted pain, physical, emotional, and existential. "I paint myself because I am so often alone," she said, "and because I am the subject I know best." Her works were small, inspired by Mexican retablos, devotional paintings of suffering and miracles. She turned this tradition inward. Her body became the canvas, and her emotions became the altar. She painted herself as split, as pierced, as bleeding. In her art, she is often impaled by nails like a martyr or tethered to a broken column to represent her shattered spine. She was never passive. Her gaze was always watching, challenging the viewer. She painted the ugliness of trauma with a strange beauty and defiance. Each stroke was a reclamation of her identity in a world that tried to define her by her brokenness. Frida wasn't just telling a story. She was inventing a new visual narrative that blended folk art, medical illustration, and the raw, surreal language of the soul. In the end, she, like the Red Queen, became a legend defined by the color of her blood and the strength of her silence. 2 women, separated by a millennium, both bound by the weight of their own myths. One wrapped in cinnabar, the other in oil and pain, both refusing to be forgotten. As the shadows grow longer in the Casa Azul, the echoes of their stories remind us that history is written in the colors we choose to leave behind. It only gets darker from here. Frida's paintings became dreamlike autopsies of her soul, framed in vibrant color, ancient culture, and bleeding myth. By the time she recovered enough to walk again, every step a reminder of the metal that had pierced her, she was no longer the girl who dreamt of medicine. She had become the medicine itself. She was an artist who had taken the worst thing that could happen to a human being and transformed it into a source of pure creation. Frida Kahlo didn't just paint her pain. She forced the world to look at it, and in doing so, she turned suffering into a sacred act of self-expression. In 1928, still healing and only 21 years old, she met the man who would become the most profound and turbulent hurricane of her life, Diego Rivera. He was 20 years her senior, a giant of Mexican muralism, famous for his sweeping frescoes that breathed the history of a people. Frida had admired his work from afar, but now she wanted his truth. She brought her canvases to him at the Ministry of Education, interrupting his work on the scaffolds to ask bluntly, "Do I have talent?" Diego looked once and saw a soul on fire. He recognized something rare, an unfiltered voice, raw, full of rage, irony, and a beauty that hurt to look at. Their relationship was as consuming as it was creative. Frida once said, "I suffered 2 accidents in my life, one in which a streetcar knocked me down. The other was Diego." They married in 1929, a pairing her parents called a marriage between an elephant and a dove. Diego was massive, unfaithful, and politically a titan. Frida was sharp-tongued, fiercely independent, and already walking with a cane. Their bond was passionate but chaotic. While Diego encouraged her growth as a painter, he was also endlessly unfaithful, even with Frida's own sister, Christina. Devastated, Frida took lovers of her own, both men and women, including Leon Trotsky and Georgia O'Keeffe. They divorced in 1939, only to remarry a year later on different terms. This time, Frida would keep her autonomy, her money, and her name. Their second marriage was less about traditional love and more about a creative partnership. 2 legends bound by a mutual understanding that no one else could grasp. In the 1930s, Frida followed Diego to the industrial heart of America, San Francisco, Detroit, and New York. These years brought her face to face with the cold steel of capitalism, which left her with a deep political discomfort. A proud Mexican nationalist and committed communist, she mocked the materialism of the North. While Diego painted enormous murals on factory walls, Frida painted smaller, quieter revolutions on tin and canvas. It was during these years of multiple surgeries and a tragic failed pregnancy in Detroit that her style solidified, sharp, surreal, and agonizingly intimate. In Henry Ford Hospital, she is shown on a hospital bed weeping, surrounded by symbols of her loss, a fetus, a snail, a cracked pelvis. It was a canvas that bled with a truth too raw for the elite galleries. Back in Mexico, she immersed herself in leftist politics, wearing traditional Tehuana dresses not just as fashion, but as a political declaration. While Rivera painted the revolution of the masses, Frida painted its human cost. The body in pieces, the mind on fire, and the self always staring back with unflinching eyes. By the late 1930s, Frida was no longer just Rivera's wife. She was a force of nature. Her Casa Azul in Coyoacán became a sanctuary of cobalt blue walls, Aztec statues, and wandering parrots. It was a living extension of her mind, a blend of tradition and rebellion. This period marked an explosion of creativity. Her paintings, like the 2 Fridas, revealed a soul divided between her European heritage and her indigenous roots. In 1939, she exhibited in Paris, where Picasso and Kandinsky praised her original voice. André Breton tried to claim her for the Surrealists, but she famously pushed back. "They thought I was a Surrealist, but I wasn't. I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality." She painted the living, breathing Mexico, a country of skeletons, hummingbirds, and hearts. Yet, as her voice grew stronger, her body continued to betray her. Chronic pain and infections became her daily companions, yet she painted through it all, propped up in bed, her torso bound in corsets, her fingers clenched around a brush. As the 1940s wore on, the darkness deepened. Her spine was deteriorating, and her right leg was constantly infected. She underwent more than 30 surgeries, often spending months encased in plaster casts that stretched her bones apart. Each canvas became an act of resistance. In The Broken Column, she presents herself split down the middle, her body pierced with nails, a cold ionic column replacing her shattered spine. Her face remained stoic, her gaze a challenge. Pain was no longer just a subject, it was her muse. Her political voice also grew louder. When her health no longer allowed her to walk, she appeared at protests in a wheelchair, defiantly holding signs against injustice. In 1953, Mexico finally gave her a solo exhibition. Doctors told her she was too fragile to attend, so she did what only Frida would do. She arrived by ambulance, was carried in on a stretcher, and placed in the center of the gallery on her own hospital bed. She celebrated her life's work from the very place where she suffered. Frida Kahlo died on July 13, 1954, in her beloved Casa Azul. Her last diary entry read, "I joyfully await the exit, and I hope never to return." Like the Red Queen of Palenque, Frida was buried with a ceremony that honored her spirit and her struggle. She was cremated, her ashes placed in a pre-Columbian urn, resting in the house where she was born. Both women, the nameless queen of the jungle and the iconic painter of Coyoacán, left behind a legacy written in the color of blood and the strength of silence. They remind us that power is not always found in the crown or the mural, but in the courage to stare at one's own reflection and not look away. Their stories are bridges between the divine and the human, between the ancient past and the visceral present. One wrapped in cinnabar, the other in oil, both refusing to be extinguished. As the light fades over the blue walls of her home, we are left with the echoes of a life that refused to be broken, even when the body was in pieces. It only gets darker from here. Dressed in her traditional finery and surrounded by the very works that bled from her soul, Frida greeted her final guests with tequila, laughter, and a fire that refused to be extinguished. Her last paintings were a haunting paradox, at once childlike and harrowing. In Marxism will give health to the sick, she painted herself cast in a steel corset, yet cradled by the giant hands of ideology, throwing away the crutches of her oppression. Her final known breath on canvas was a still life of sliced, sun-drenched watermelons. Upon one, she carved the words that would define her eternity. Viva la vida, long live life. Even as the shadow of death touched her shoulder, she remained defiant, joyful, and fiercely political. Frida Kahlo's last portraits were not merely images of a woman. They were final acts of revolution, painted in the darkest hues of pain but signed with the gold of life. On July 13, 1954, at the age of 47, Frida Kahlo died in the same room where her story began, La Casa Azul in Coyoacán. While the official records spoke of a pulmonary embolism, those who knew the weight of her heart whispered of a soul simply exhausted by the long, brutal war with its own body. Just days before the end, she had dragged her wheelchair-bound form to a protest against the CIA coup in Guatemala, her clenched fist raised high against the fading light. Revolution was her final heartbeat. Her last diary entry remains a piercing echo in the halls of art history. I hope the exit is joyful, and I hope never to return. Her funeral was held at the Palacio de Bellas Arts, Mexico's temple of culture. Her body, draped in the red flag of the Communist Party, was guarded by a silent vanguard of friends, revolutionaries, and ghosts. Diego Rivera was inconsolable, a giant broken by the loss of the only woman who truly understood the language of his soul. But in the years that followed, something extraordinary happened. Frida Kahlo refused to vanish into the dust of history. At first, her name was a secret whispered in elite art circles, her work too political for the surrealists and too surreal for the traditionalists. But slowly, her image and her defiance began to resonate with a world that was starting to break its own chains. By the 1970s and 80s, as the voices of the forgotten began to rise, Frida's voice became a roar. She was no longer just a painter. She became a global icon of pain transformed into beauty, of feminism born through fire, and of an identity celebrated without apology. Her unibrow, her flower-crowned hair, and her unflinching gaze became a map for the marginalized. Today, Frida Kahlo's face is everywhere, printed on fabric, painted on city walls, and etched into the hearts of millions. But the power of her legacy isn't just in the recognition of her features. It's in the truth they represent. Frida never tried to be flawless. She never fit into the boxes the world built for her. In an age that demands a polished perfection, she gave us the raw, messy, and vibrant reality of being human. She celebrated the very things that made her different: her disability, her queerness, her radical politics, and turned them into a mirror that dared the world to look back. For the queer community, she is a fearless bisexual icon who lived out loud when the world demanded silence. For women, she is the proof that power requires no permission. For the disabled, she is the ultimate evidence that pain can be the fuel for the brush, not the end of the journey. For Mexico, she is the reclaimed daughter, fierce, folkloric, and forever woven into the national spirit. Works like The Two Fridas and The Broken Column are no longer just seen. They are felt by anyone who has ever had to turn their own suffering into something sacred. She lived in the margins and turned them into center stage. She was a walking contradiction, a communist who wore gold, a woman betrayed who never stopped loving, a body in pieces with a soul that was unbreakable. Frida Kahlo never asked to be a symbol. She simply told the truth about herself. And in doing so, she gave a voice to millions who had never seen their own struggles reflected in the gilded frames of history. Now, when we look at her, we do not see a victim. We see courage. We see the violent beauty of resistance. We see Frida, not gone but immortal. From the Cinnabar-soaked tombs of the Maya Red Queen to the blue-walled sanctuary of Coyoacán, the story of power has always been written by those who refuse to be silent. One queen lies nameless in the jungle. The other is the most famous face in the world. Yet they are sisters in the dark, bound by the scarlet thread of their own making. Their legends remind us that even when the body fails, the spirit can carve its name into eternity. The light is fading now over the Casa Azul, leaving only the scent of copal and the echo of a final, defiant laugh. It only gets darker from here,